Hey, uh, ladies, gentlemen, and those who lieth betwixt. Uh, just got to say, some of the clips that I use in this essay will have subtitles and stuff on them, because getting a clean copy of the film is really hard, so I've just had to nab whatever I can get. Apologies for the minor inconvenience. When people ask me what my favourite film is, I often find it hard to give a definitive answer. I don't really have a strict ranking system, more of a pool of films which I would call my favourites depending on what mood I'm in. Blade Runner, Taxi Driver, The Breakfast Club, The Truman Show, Pleasantville, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. They're all excellent and I love them dearly. That being said, Vampire's Kiss starring Nicolas Cage is absolutely the best film ever.
Hello. Hi. I was just thinking. Hello. Hands. Yeah.
The way I would describe Vampire's Kiss is, it's American Psycho, but better. And I do mean that with utter sincerity. I think this film does a much better job exploring the same themes and ideas. I can't comment on the original book American Psycho, but in fairness, a book can't star Nicolas Cage, so it's already at a disadvantage.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
The plot can be a bit difficult to describe without interpretation, but I'll do my best. Peter Lowe is a Playboy literary executive for a publishing company in New York. He has a nice apartment, he regularly engages in one-night stands with attractive women, he talks to his therapist every week, and doesn't appear to do any actual work. One night he's doing his normal womanizing when a bat flies into his apartment and forces him to fight it off. His reaction to this is odd.
And I'll be damned if I didn't get really turned on.
Meanwhile, at work, a client asks Peter for an old contract of his so he can frame it on his wall. A small and unimportant favour which Peter gives to his secretary Alva, and then proceeds to blow out of all reasonable proportion. He hooks up with a woman called Rachel from a club and they get busy, but it turns out she's a bit quirky. She's not like other girls. From here, the film just gets more and more insane. So Peter wakes up the next day and seems to believe that she's still in his bed, even though she's clearly not. He bails from a date with another woman for seemingly no reason, starts acting like a coke addict, gets visited by Rachel again except maybe not, gets repeatedly sexually dominated, trashes his apartment, invents a meme, and becomes convinced he's turning into a vampire. As you do. His abuse of Alva escalates to the point of sexual assault, he dons some plastic vampire teeth, murders a girl at a nightclub, goes through a nasty breakup with Rachel, but, again, maybe not, and ends up roaming the streets of New York. He then has an imaginary therapy session where he gets together with an imaginary woman, has an imaginary breakup with her a few minutes later, and finally gets killed by a not imaginary stake from Alva's not imaginary brother, probably desperate to end this tomfoolery once and for all. The end! Except for those last few seconds of Rachel laughing, because why not? So there's a lot to unpack. Part 1. What is actually going on here? So as you might have gathered from my slightly scatterbrained summary, a lot of this movie is unclear and up to interpretation. I'm honestly a bit stumped as to where to start. After all, there are so many different lenses to analyse this bad boy through. Feminist theory.
What the hell is he doing in here?
Freudian theory.
I was a little drunk. Plus, I was horny.
Marxist theory.
I couldn't think of a more horrible job if I wanted to. And you have to do it, or I'll fire you. Do you understand?
Jungian theory.
I'm a vampire! I'm a vampire! I'm a vampire!
Hell, maybe even a little bit of LGBT theory if you're looking for it. I mean, he does seem to love getting his neck penetrated by those long, hard fangs. Yeah, I don't know if I'll be looking into this in any great detail because my thoughts aren't quite clear, but I thought it'd be sort of worth analysing if anyone else wants to make a video essay on this film. I don't know, just a thought. So I think the first step is to work out what exactly happened. Is Peter turning into a vampire? No. No, he's not. It's all in his head. I don't think that's a very controversial take, since the film seems to go out of its way to establish that. See, normally in these types of character study movies, you see everything from the protagonist's perspective, constantly leaving the viewer guessing as to what's real and what isn't. Taxi Driver shows the New York streets from Travis Bickle's distorted viewpoint. American Psycho has very little visible distinction between reality and hallucination. Mr. Robot even uses the unreliable narrator as an integral part of the plot. But this? Nope. There are a couple of times that you see things from Peter's perspective, just to give the viewer an idea of what he's seeing, but it routinely drives home that his visions are just that. Visions. Take this bit for instance, the typical scene in all vampire transformation stories when the protagonist realises their reflection is gone. But look how they choose to show it.
Oh Christ, where am I? Where am I? Oh Christ, where am I? I've become one. A vampire. Oh God, where am I?
By choosing not to include the audience into Peter's descent into madness, the film is deploying an almost Brechtian alienation effect. For those who don't know, Bertolt Brecht was a theatre director who used numerous techniques to remind the audience that they were watching a play, not reality. Musical numbers, third-person dialogue, making the audience visible to each other, they were all used to deliberately block people from believing the action on stage, and instead engage with it on an intellectual level. Now, while it doesn't go so far as to shatter the illusion of the film, it nevertheless forces you to consider his condition more critically. What's this guy's deal? Why does he think he's a vampire? Why does he wear those sunglasses indoors? Why did he crawl around on all fours after putting in the vampire teeth? Seriously, that's not a rhetorical question. I have literally no idea why he did that. I'll get onto my take about what literally happened with Rachel in a bit, but first I think it's best to answer the big question, part 2.
Why did you become a vampire? Why couldn't you be normal?
The myth of the vampire has existed about as long as human civilization, and it's not exactly difficult to see why. Blood is one of the most essential elements of the body, often being used synonymously with the concept of life itself, so the idea of a being that feeds on that is terrifying on a deep psychological level. It's more than likely that vampires originated as an expression of our fear of wild animals leaping out and killing us for food, but as civilizations progressed, the vampire quickly took on a very different meaning. The classical depiction of the aristocratic vampire we know today is no accident. Class conflict was such an underlying theme to vampire stories that your boy Marx himself referenced them when describing power dynamics that exist between workers and the bourgeoisie.
Capital is dead labour, which, vampire-like, lives only by sucking living labour, and lives the more labour it sucks.
The vampire is a creature that can only exist by parasitically living off the vitality of the living. Likewise, the aristocrats and monarchs from the times of the first modern vampire stories were growing rich off the back of the toil done by the peasants under their control.
A comparison I'm sure we can't draw today.
The sexual element can't be ignored either. With a long history of patriarchal societies, it's unsurprising that the vampire myth has been used to explore gender dynamics as well as class dynamics. The image of the seductive female vampire has often been used as a way for those societies to express their fears of women having autonomy and not living up to the meek, virginal expectations that were placed on them. But also, the image of characters like Dracula preying on young women can be seen as an exploration of the fears of rampant male libido, the dark underbelly of masculinity coming to the surface to prey on the female population. It makes sense then that a character like Christian Grey from the 50 Shades series started out in an online fanfiction as Edward, the main vampire in Twilight. Once the metaphors are stripped away, vampires are essentially rich individuals with a possessive and uncaring attitude and a rampant sexual appetite. In other words, they're Peter Lowe. Right from the start, Peter is characterised as having a very cold attitude towards the women in his life. The first time we see him, he's at his therapist's office talking about his latest hookup and how he went from wanting her to wanting her gone in the space of a single night.
She took the hint. She woke up, you were fully dressed, ready to go to work.
More or less, yeah.
And yet, just the night before, you wanted her very badly.
Yeah.
Though it does seem like he craves deeper connection on some level, as shown by the several times when he enviously watches couples in the street, as well as the happily married cab driver who later shows up in his hallucinations. It's interesting then that when he's presented with the opportunity for this connection in the form of Jackie, the woman he was sleeping with when interrupted by the bat, he bails. First by simply leaving midday, and then by being dragged off by his imaginary vampire GF. It's clear that he doesn't like doing that, but it's as if some subconscious force is sabotaging his efforts to find happiness. This is where Rachel comes in. The way I read the film, they really did meet in that bar and went back to his apartment to have sex. She may have even bitten him on the neck, just not with the vampire fangs. But then, she left of her own accord the next day. This is what triggered Peter's descent into madness. At one point in the film, his therapist comments on how he feels he has to be the one to end every session.
You have always been telling me when our time is up, and I just wonder if maybe. Does it make you feel a little insecure when I say?
And later, during one of his outbursts about the contract, he goes through the alphabet to prove a point and insists on reciting the whole thing despite her protests.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G,
Peter.
H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P,
Peter.
Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z! Huh? That's all you have to do!
So clearly, Peter is one of those people who can't stand the idea of someone else taking charge of a situation, something that becomes particularly ironic given the nature of his imaginary relationship with Rachel. I think he may have developed genuine feelings for her, and the fact that she became more dominant in bed and then left him triggered a crisis of repressed feelings in his mind. Perhaps this is also where the bat fits into the picture. When it cut him off in the middle of sexual intercourse, it could have created an association between bats and his own deep-rooted feelings of impotence. The bat, of course, being a key piece of iconography in the vampire myth. This is all speculation, of course, but I think it makes for a good way to understand the events that we see. Whew! I'm on a roll, guys. Let's go weirder. Let's go stranger. Let's go straight on to Part 3. Carl Jung would have a field day with this guy. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung is famous, amongst other things, for his concept of the shadow. To vastly oversimplify, the shadow is the underside of our psyche, the part of our personality comprised of all the things we choose to ignore or shove into the unconscious. These could be things that society has deemed to be unacceptable, or the elements of our nature that we as individuals have decided to neglect. To Jung, the process of developing isn't a matter of overcoming the shadow, but in learning to accept it in a process called individuation. To repress those elements is profoundly unhealthy, and will only cause the shadow to grow and become ever denser until it starts to emerge in sudden and unexpected ways. A good example of this would be the stereotype of the monk with a dirty mind, or the teacher's pet who suddenly goes off the rails. By suppressing their feelings, be it lust, rage or disobedience, it gives them more power over the person than they would have had otherwise. When they're confronted with these contradictions, they are capable of deploying any number of coping mechanisms. They may lash out, blame others, scapegoat their problems, anything to protect the ego from having to face up to it. In doing so, they not only create a lot of pain for the people around them, but also a lot of pain for themselves. As Jung himself put it,
"The fact is that if one tries beyond one's capacity to be perfect, their shadow descends into hell and becomes the devil."
See where I'm going here? Now, Peter Lowe is clearly not trying to be a goody-goody, but he's definitely someone who wants to project certain ideas about himself. He's successful, he's slick, he can get any woman he wants, he's the boss, he's on top, he's in control. He's on top, he's in control. He's on top, he's in control, he's on top, he's in control, he's on top, he's in control, he's on top, he's in control. So when Rachel came along and shattered that fragile facade, all those repressed feelings and elements of his nature came suddenly rushing to the surface, and his shadow was very, very dense indeed. Throughout the film, Peter displays signs of just about every single coping mechanism in the book as his descent into madness becomes ever more violent. He starts off in denial, making coffee for Rachel even though she's clearly gone, and imagining her taking over his love life. Her domineering nature, again a product of his own unconscious desires, conflicts with his pre-ascribed notions of masculinity and playboy lifestyle, so he compensates by becoming ever more aggressive towards Alva, eventually going full-blown rapist. He ruins his relationships without quite knowing why, becomes obsessed with tiny inconveniences like the missing contract, projects his problems onto other people saying they're the real cause of his misery.
She's a goddamn vampire! She made
and eventually ends up consumed by his delusions, lost to reality forever. As I discussed in part 2, the vampire myth has often been used as an exploration of certain deep-seated elements in human society and psychology. It makes real thematic sense for this to be the form it would take on for him. All that self-loathing and self-centeredness, all that venom hidden behind the public persona, it all manifests in his compulsion to literally live out the personification of those aspects. Look, I'm basically trying to say it's a metaphor. Yeah? Yeah, you get it? It's a big metaphor. I'm sorry, I don't know how else to say it, and now I'm like 5 pages in. I've really dug myself into a hole. I've somehow gotten into like Jung and archetypes, and look, I'm sorry, I don't know how you do this. This is my first video essay. By the end of the film, his degradation is complete. Rachel leaves him after he kills a woman in the nightclub, the next scene revealing their extended relationship and her status as a vampire to be entirely in his head. Peter roams the street with a wooden stake.
I'm a vampire. Kill me. Kill me.
And ends up talking to his therapist. Or at least pretending to. In a display of the depths his narcissism has sunk to, when he tells her of his desire to find love and imagines her setting him up with a woman, the woman he imagines is exactly like him, but in female form.
I like poetry, horseback riding, Vivaldi, and long weekends in the country.
Those are exactly the same things that I like.
He cannot conceive of loving someone who isn't exactly like him. But even in his imagination, the relationship falls apart within minutes. And what does she keep asking that drives him nuts?
Why did you kill the vampire? Why can't you be normal? Oh, Peter, does this mean we can never have children?
He can't escape the shadow, even in his imagination. That reminder of his self-loathing follows him everywhere, and when Alva's brother goes to attack him, rather than fight, he helps drive the stake through his heart, ending it once and for all. Wow, I kind of made this film sound a bit bleak, didn't I? Thankfully, it's not all heavy psychology and Jungian archetypes. There's also Nicolas Cage. Yeah. Alright, let's address the big bug-eyed elephant in the room. Part 4. The amazing Nicolas Cage performance that single-handedly makes this whole film work. Seriously, it's fantastic. Oh my god. As a professional actor myself, I am perpetually jealous of Nicolas Cage in this movie. The absolute balls of that man. To be able to put on a performance like this, and never once be burdened by such limiting questions like, am I going too far? Or, is this really appropriate? Those are the questions of cowards, and Mr. Cage is no coward, I can assure you, sir.
I don't know, my whole motivation here was to try to see how big I could get my eyes, just to freak her out.
It's just amazing how they work, those eyes. It's just amazing.
His performance is really what saved the movie from total obscurity. As strange as Christian Bale could be as Patrick Bateman, he has nothing on Cage. Every choice is interesting, every second of screen time dynamic. Some may say that it's bad because it's over the top, but really, what even is a good performance? What even is a good movie? I genuinely think this may have created a whole new way for a piece of art to succeed. It sits in the strange grey area between what we would call traditionally good and so bad it's good. Not the moving emotional perfection of Eternal Sunshine, but not the silly confusing mess of The Room either. Cage's performance is madness, yes, but there is method in it. I mentioned earlier about the film's use of deliberately alienating techniques to get you to think more critically about Peter's breakdown. Well, this performance is probably the greatest example of that. No one else in this film behaves in the same batshit crazy manner as Cage. They're all playing it straight like it's a normal movie, and meanwhile he's all like,
I'm a vampire! I'm a vampire!
There you are!
Too late! Too late! Too late!
yeah, that. And by being so weird and over the top, he deliberately makes it impossible for the audience to relate to him. As the transformation from normal to vampire goes on, he grows more and more distorted in his body language, emulating the vampire Count Orlok from the 1922 silent movie Nosferatu. That performance is similarly exaggerated. From the movements to the frankly amazing character design, every single aspect of it was intended to radiate pure evil and decrepitude. As writer and actor Mark Gatiss put it,
in his utter alienness lies his menace. Nothing about him seems susceptible to human reason or emotion. He's like a figure that stepped out of a medieval painting of hell, an embodiment of apocalypse, intruding into reality.
But while Max Schreck's performance in Nosferatu was meant to inspire terror, Cage's performance seems to radiate something a little different. Vivid patheticness. One of the main problems with films like American Psycho or Joker, or indeed any film that depicts the villain in a somewhat sympathetic light, is that the audience can sometimes miss the point and glorify those people, with characters like Patrick Bateman having their own fashion line and countless articles written about them. But Peter Lowe?
Sharon. Oh, what a beautiful day.
Yeah, I can't imagine anyone wanting to be like this guy. Another advantage is that it keeps the audience constantly guessing what his intentions are at any point during the film. Because every line is over the top and played like an alien trying to comprehend the human emotions, you can never really tell when he's being sincere or lying for social standing. Is he genuine when he's talking to his therapist? Is he genuine when he's laughing along with his bosses? Is he genuine when he shows up at Alva's house with a nice warm gift of... All of it is in question. I mean, the guy literally cries by saying boo-hoo. It's like a child's understanding of emotions. It serves to highlight the kind of pervasive superficiality in corporate culture that so many other films and books later went on to explore. In a world of rampant greed and exploitation, a world we're only really starting to understand now, the fact that someone so overtly monstrous and twisted as Peter can come in, screaming and throwing fits, mimicking the behaviour of an actual, literal vampire, and the most reaction he gets is...
He is so eccentric.
Speaks volumes. Also, it's just really funny. Seriously, this movie is an absolute blast to watch. This is the Nicolas Cage movie. All those other films that are used as examples of why Nicolas Cage is such a funny presence on screen. No. Forget all of them. Forget every other Nicolas Cage movie. This is it. This is the film. I mean, for God's sake, I haven't even included half the stuff in there. There's a bit where he literally just says the word high school, and it's the funniest thing I've ever seen. Like, I put it in this video. I've turned it into a meme with my mates. It's just, it is a wellspring of memeable content, and I'm just, it's the Halloween movie to watch casually. Just go, do it, please, go now, stop watching the video, go, do it now.
Part 5. Conclusion.
There is so much more I could get into with this movie. I could talk about the surprisingly modern commentary on race and gender politics, the meta-elements of all those people Cage interacts with on the street being actual, real pedestrians, the sociological aspects of big city isolation and how that played into his downfall. But I'm going to leave it here, because I want you to have your own experience with this film. The fact that it's still pretty obscure despite basically inventing the Nicolas Cage meme is frankly a criminal shame. In a world where films seem to be becoming increasingly predictable, it's nice to have something that shatters basically every rule in the book, something to remind you that there is no real formula for success. The DVD is out of print at time of recording, and that is not okay. I want a re-release, Blu-ray, Steelbook, packed with special features and director's commentary. I want it talked about as much as Taxi Driver and Joker. I want more video essays, more commentaries. The time for a Vampire's Kiss renaissance is now, and I will not rest until it gets the justice it deserves. Anyway, what are your thoughts? Drop something in the comments and let's get talking. Share this video with your friends, your family, your neighbours. Probably not your nan though. Might give her a heart attack. Unless she's cool with it, in which case you can share it with her as well. This has been a That Chat Paul production. Goodbye, I'll see you later, and you may now return to your life. Bye.